Just suppose a medieval was to arrive in the modern world today. Coming from a time of knights and castles, monks and abbeys, they would see our 21st century world as completely alien to the one that they lived in. Many things that we find acceptable would horrify a person from the Middle Ages. Let's bring someone from the 14th century into the future and see our world through their eyes. A world where they would find a lot of our behaviours just not that appropriate. It would be easier if we ignore the obvious issues of modern conveniences and technologies like central heating, airplanes, and smartphones when we meet our medieval time-traveling friend, and concentrate rather on the differences in our social expectations. Although we dress differently, eat differently, grow taller, and live longer, we still have a lot in common with our feudal friend. And although our medieval visitor will certainly notice our unusual laws and unusual languages, it will probably be the freedoms that we enjoy today in the modern world that they will find the most disconcerting. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Have you ever wondered whether you were descended from some Anglo-Saxon king or perhaps a Norman noble? Family ties were the glue that held medieval society together, and knowing whose son or daughter you were was vital. Imagine knowing that, but being able to go back centuries. We've partnered with MyHeritage for today's video, the #1 service for tracking your family history. We may have technology to make it easier these days, but the urge to know where your parents, grandparents, and more came from is as old as the hills. MyHeritage is an amazing service that helps you track your family through time without needing to pore over records in a dusty old library. You can use a thing called Instant Discoveries to add new information really easily. All you have to do is click on the Discoveries tab at the top of your page and you'll be shown people or photos that could be a part of your family tree. Then you can just add them to your tree. They even have a feature that can colorize those photos of your great-grandparents that have been sat in a box behind your bed, so you can see what they would have looked like in glorious Technicolor. It can also enhance images and even animate old family photos. I'm terrible at remembering dates and figures, so being able to search for my family by approximate year and not having the full information didn't stop me from being able to build my family tree. So if you're curious to see if you're more Ragnar Shaggy Britches or William of Orange, sign up for a 14-day free trial to explore everything that MyHeritage has to offer, including Smart Match, Instant Discoveries, and more. Use our link to get a free trial and get a 50% discount if you continue the subscription. Tugging the Forelock. During the Middle Ages, any woman wearing any type of male clothing such as trousers or shorts was seen as indecent and immoral. Women were not even allowed to show their naked arms or legs in public. The wearing of an apron was a sign of respectability, and most women would wear a special one to go to church on Sunday, dyed blue with a plant called woad. The words "an apron" were originally a napron, meaning a small type of napkin worn when eating at the table to prevent food from being spilled onto clothing. Over time, the letter N transferred from one word to the other. This also happened with oranges and oak trees. Everybody, male and female, wore headwear, and it was expected that men would remove their headwear known as doffing your hat and step aside when meeting their superiors in the street. Everyone had a station in life and was expected to remain obedient and know their place. There were rules that had to be followed when interacting with others. During the 14th century, sumptuary laws were brought in at the request of the nobles, who were cheesed off with the new class of merchants wearing expensive clothing. It seemed that the lower classes were mistaking them as being socially superior and treating them with great courtesy. How could a working class peasant tell who was part of the aristocracy if every prince, lord, and jumped up merchant was wearing silk, velvet, and fur? In 14th century London, it became law that, quote, "no common woman should go to market or out of her house with a hood furred with anything other than lambskin or rabbit fur, on pain of losing her hoods to the sheriffs, with the exception of those ladies who wear fur capes. Because shop girls, wet nurses, and other servants, and loose women bedizen themselves with hoods furred with ermine and miniver like ladies of quality." These were the sort of restrictions put in place to try and stop people from parading around in their fancy clothes like someone from a higher class. In fact, everyone was expected to dress appropriately to their station as a means to preserve social order. The prostitutes aren't allowed to wear aprons, and those living in England's capital should wear yellow hoods to abide by the city's regulations. The clergy, both monks and nuns, are expected to wear their traditional religious habits. Even the lepers had to wear cloaks and carry bells to identify themselves. In medieval society, what you wore represented what you were. Imagine how they would perceive us, without our hats and aprons, ordinary working people walking around in our designer labels, barging around at rush hour and bumping into one another in busy shops without even an apology. The Gender Chasm. Our medieval time traveller would probably be appalled by the freedoms that women have today. For them, the church and its teachings ruled over everything. So the fact that, as Chaucer describes it, the Bible was, quote, "a text wherein we find that woman was the ruin of mankind," was always going to be problematic. And medieval women were blamed for all the physical, intellectual, and moral weaknesses of society. Medieval men just couldn't seem to get past Eve persuading Adam to take a bite out of the forbidden apple, which caused the downfall of all humanity, could they? By the later Middle Ages, women were under a lot of pressure to marry. They were usually described by their marital status, not by what they did, and being a single woman became less appealing. Because sex between two unmarried people was a sin, independent women tended to be looked on with suspicion. One historian noted that, quote, "in medieval Europe, with its strict classification of women as virgins, wives, and widows, any woman who did not fit into one of the three categories risked being equated with members of the only identifiable, demarcerated group that did not fit: prostitutes." As the established patriarchy tried to take control of the situation because an independent woman was seen as both a financial and symbolic threat, so much so that strong and healthy single women under the age of 50 were forbidden to rent a house or rooms but to go into service, and women with a bad reputation were to be evicted by their landlords. Our unenlightened traveller would be surprised to see a woman even doing something as normal as attending a funeral, as this would never happen in the Middle Ages. In fact, they would be shocked to see a funeral being held during daylight hours, as a medieval service was held at night with only men in attendance. And with no morgues or storage facilities for bodies, funerals took place very quickly, usually within a day or two of the passing. As there were no phones or internet for friends and relatives to be quickly informed of a loved one's passing, a month-mind memorial service would be held at least 4 weeks after the death, so that the family of the deceased could have time to travel and pay their respects. Then later, a year-mind feast would be held to mark the 1-year anniversary of the bereavement. Copulating couples. As sex is only meant for procreation within marriage, so woe betide any single woman that found herself pregnant. Unmarried parents risked being punished for the crime of fornication, and it was the woman who often received a more serious punishment. Shunned by those around her, she would have to move away from home to an area where she could pretend to have been married and widowed. In that way, she would not have to face the loss of her honor, and her child would not face being stigmatized and labeled as a bastard. Many women faced with the poverty and shame of having a child out of wedlock felt that they had no choice but to abandon their offspring. Imagine how scandalized our antiquated traveller would be when they saw how many couples now lived together without marrying, and how some of them even had deliberately made the decision to bring up a family in this way. How we conduct our intimate relationships would also be seen as unseemly for a medieval. It was the church that shaped attitudes towards sex, which was all about reproduction. Sex should be between a married couple in the missionary position, and any other intimacies were seen as sodomy and considered lustful and sinful. Although homosexuality was widespread in the Middle Ages, it completely went against the teachings of the church. Many terms that we now use for sexuality didn't even exist in the Middle Ages, such as homo, hetero, or bi. Sex wasn't even really discussed then, and they would certainly find any displays of affection in public from couples, be they straight or gay, as bewildering. Biblical power and authority. For any medieval time traveller arriving in 21st century Europe, the fact that the church is not involved in every aspect of our lives will come as a total shock. Non-attendance at Mass on a Sunday was a grave offence in the Middle Ages, one that would land the perpetrator in front of a church court to be given a fine. Now, for a lot of Europeans, being religious is just not important anymore. In 2012, 16% of them said they were non-believers, and 7% said they were atheists. If our time-travelling medieval had landed in Great Britain, they would find that over 30% of the population in 2015 considered themselves to be irreligious. Imagine how worried they would be for our souls. If they did happen to attend church, they would be startled to find that the service wasn't all in Latin. For a medieval, writing or owning any scriptural works in English was seen as heretical. The church believed that common men couldn't possibly understand and therefore shouldn't even try to understand God's word. Only a priest could do this and explain the meaning to a layman. During the Middle Ages, Sunday was the Lord's Day, a day of complete rest to contemplate God and all spiritual matters. Sunday was such an important day that Saturday was made a half day by the church just so that everyone could prepare properly for the Sabbath. Saturday afternoons were used for preparing meals, making bread, fetching water and chopping wood so that Sunday could be experienced with minimum effort. How inappropriate would they think it was to see us going about our daily business on a Sunday just like we do every other day of the week, going out and enjoying ourselves at the cinema, bowling or even shopping at one of our many retail parks. Everyone medieval went to church in their much valued best clothing, so rocking up in your joggers isn't really going to cut it. Keeping their Sunday best clothing in decent order was important, and the medievals found the best place to hang them was in the toilet area to avoid them being attacked by moths. The belief was that any insects would avoid the smell of a non-flushing toilet. This could be where the word for an indoor toilet came from, garderobe, what we now call a wardrobe, a place where clothing or robes are guarded or warded. People today often walk around willy-nilly saying the expression OMG without giving a second thought about it. Our medieval visitor would be horrified by this because blasphemy, the act of speaking about God or religion in a sacrilegious way, was a serious crime in the Middle Ages. For smaller transgressions like taking the Lord's name in vain, a fine or imprisonment might suffice, but for more serious offences, the consequences could be fatal, with death by hanging or burning at the stake being used as a punishment. The offence of heresy was originally part of canon law, a set of regulations made by the Catholic Church. In 1378, Pope Gregory XI commanded that punishment should be given to John Wycliffe and his followers known as the Lollards. Their demands for the reformation of Western Christianity and their criticism of the Roman Catholic Church were condemned as heretical. At that time, according to church law, the only real punishment that the bishops could dole out was excommunication. Unhappy with this, the English clergy pushed for tougher laws, and by 1400 further powers were granted under the rule of King Henry IV. It allowed the arrest and imprisonment of all preachers of heresy, all schoolmasters infected with heresy, and all owners and writers of heretical books. If the detainee refused to renounce their beliefs, they would be handed over to the state and taken to be publicly burned as a warning to others. There is a long list of those who were executed in Roman Catholic Europe during the 15th and early 16th centuries, including Joan of Arc and the Templars. How shocked would a medieval find our human rights laws that protect a person's right to religious freedom in the UK, where people can, quote, hold opinions and receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority. When our medieval time traveler does come to visit, we should do well to remember that what is considered the norm in one place or time is not necessarily normal in another. Perhaps it is appropriate to finish on a quote from the novel The Go-Between by L.P. Hardley. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Thank you for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Cheers!